For a closer look at the implications of these defeats for Russia and its president, let's bring in Dr. Robert Horvath from Trobe University. Thank you very much for your time. What are the implications out of these defeats for Putin himself?
I think now Vladimir Putin is in a very difficult situation. He has suffered a series of defeats both in the political arena and now a very serious military one. The first was the so-called Navalny crisis. It was part of the lead up to this war. He was exposed as a tyrant who was prepared to use banned chemical weapons against his most popular domestic political opponent. That was followed by Navalny's release of a video documentary that exposed Putin as an incredibly corrupt, kleptocratic ruler. That's been accompanied by the increasing authoritarianism of the Putin regime, whereas 10 years ago, elections were rigged to a significant degree, but there was still some competition. Now, the elections in Russia don't provide any legitimacy for the regime. Over the past week, Russia has seen local elections that were described by Russia's main election monitoring organization as the regime competing with a vacuum.
And with Putin's mishandling of the crisis, there appears to be a growing tension between Russian nationalists and the Putin regime.
Absolutely. Well, and this is the development that's been triggered by the military defeat. Until now, Putin has been quite effective in managing Russian nationalists and in rallying them behind the flag and behind the military campaign. The defeat has meant that his challenge is not merely to suppress liberals and leftists and peace activists, but he's now dealing with Russian nationalists who are saying there must have been treason in high places, that the regime has failed to treat the war seriously enough. This problem's been aggravated by some really bad optics that accompanied this military defeat. Whilst thousands of Russian soldiers were fleeing for their lives, Vladimir Putin was in Moscow pretending that everything was normal and opening what was claimed to be the world's largest Ferris wheel. And just catastrophic military defeat, arguably Russia's worst military defeat since the Second World War, and Putin is opening a Ferris wheel and smiling and acting as if everything's fine. That has become one of the central images that is underlies claims that he's out of touch and that it is his regime that bears responsibility for this defeat.
And fundamentally leads to a legitimacy crisis for him on, as you've alluded to there, on a number of different fronts.
Absolutely, yes. His regime is now in very serious trouble. And what Putin does next is very difficult to predict. But one thing we can say is with Putin, you can't rule anything out. I mean, this is a leader who was prepared to use banned chemical weapons against his most popular domestic opponent. This is a leader who was prepared to declare war against a country that is historically connected to Russia, in which any sane Russian leader would have prioritized friendly relations with Ukraine. There are several immediate possibilities. There are nationalists who are demanding that Putin formally declares war on Ukraine, which would enable him to declare a mobilization of the Russian population to fight in the war, train millions of young Russian men to fight. The problem with that is that the war itself is not popular, and this is a regime that has a problem with young people in particular. Young people have not been supportive of the regime. Many of them joined Navalny's protests over the past 8 years or so, and mass mobilization to fight is likely to trigger protests which could prove fatal for the regime. And the second option is...
Dr. Horvath, yep. Is there a prospect that he uses nuclear weapons? Is that still possible?
Yeah, well, that is the second option that many nationalists are talking about now. They tend not to talk about it explicitly. They say we do have another path that we can follow, and it's a path that some Western countries have followed in the past. This is a serious risk, particularly because Putin has a kind of personal identification with nuclear weapons. He often talks about how he has been prepared to use them. Several years ago, he gave a particularly bizarre interview where he talked about how if there was nuclear war, then we would all go to heaven as martyrs, but the other side would croak. So it's if he is cornered as the kind of leader for whom he has little prospect of a comfortable retirement. He's not going to leave politics and write his memoir and spend time with his grandchildren.
Sure.
The best he can hope for is jail. And so for a leader in that situation, there is a real risk of a very serious military escalation.
Robert Horvath from La Trobe University, I appreciate your insights. Thank you.